Thank you for joining our presentation, Embracing Humanism, Confronting Antisemitism in Healthcare and Genetic Counseling. As genetic counselors, we commit ourselves to honoring the dignity, autonomy, and lived experiences of every individual we serve. Yet we know that prejudice and discrimination can undermine that commitment in profound ways. Today we turn our attention to anti-Semitism, a bias that affects not only our Jewish clients and colleagues, but also the health of our broader society. We will begin by grounding ourselves in an understanding of Jewish identity. You'll hear vignettes and preliminary results from a study of Jewish genetic counselors, offering insight into the challenges of anti-Semitism faced within our own profession. Experts will then guide us through the impact of anti-Semitism and the ethical responsibilities we share in addressing it. This is not only an academic discussion, it is an opportunity for reflection as we consider examples of bias and the dangers of dehumanization, patterns that echo some of the darkest moments in history. We're called to reflect on how our code of ethics equips us to respond with integrity, compassion, and courage. Thank you for engaging in this important conversation. We'd like to recognize members of the Planning Committee who have dedicated many hours of their time and expertise to create this presentation. The presenters and moderators have no conflicts of interest to declare. These are the learning objectives for our presentation. Now let's get started.
Let's go, Mom. We're going to be late. Hi, Mr. Tony. Mom, what's that?
Nothing. Just get in the car. Let's go.
Who did that?
Come on. Right now. In. Get in. Right now. Let's go.
Did you paint it or something?
Move it. Seatbelt on. Right now. Put your seatbelt on.
Hi, Mr. Tony.
Let's take a moment to pause and reflect. What if the woman in the video was bringing her child to a pediatric genetic counseling appointment that morning? What if she was on her way to drop her child off at daycare before heading into work as a genetic counselor? Aligned with the NSGC Code of Ethics, this session will take us through the 4 sections as they relate to the impact of anti-Semitism on genetic counselors, their clients, their colleagues, and society. Let us begin with the impact of anti-Semitism on our clients.
So thank you both for coming today. I understand that you have to both come from your work because today's a work day, but you're here to learn about genetic testing and pregnancy?
Yeah, we just want to make sure everything's okay.
Of course, that's what we're here for. One part of this is offering screening based on your family history and background, just to see if there are any inherited conditions we should be aware of.
What kind of background are you talking about?
Well, that's a good question. Some conditions are more common in people from certain ancestry groups. For example, Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. There are some well-studied conditions that we often screen for if there's that background on either side of the family.
Why do you need to know that?
Does it make a difference?
I understand that can feel like a loaded question. It's not about religion or identity, it's about inherited genes. Even if someone doesn't practice, the ancestry can still affect what we test for.
Well, people assume things, say things.
Yeah, we don't tell people. We've seen what can happen.
Thank you both for sharing that. I want to say clearly, nothing you say in this space will be used to judge you. My role is to give you information and keep your family supported.
So you're saying this is about the genes, not the label.
Exactly. It's about biology, not identity.
My grandparents were Jewish and on both sides, and so were David's parents.
Thank you for trusting me with that. Based on that, I can walk you through conditions we typically screen for and explain what the testing looks like. Then you can decide what's right for you.
Hmm.
Consider pausing the recording so you may reflect on the vignette you just watched. Have you experienced a time when you felt judged or uncomfortable being asked about your identity? We will now hear from our invited speaker, Ms. Malka Shah.
Hi everyone, my name is Malka Shah. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm based out of New Jersey, but I am licensed in New York, New Jersey, and Florida, and I have been in the field of mental health for well over 25 years. I've been in private practice for over 17 years, as well as seeing clients directly. I do clinical supervision, educational training. I provide both individual and couples therapy. I specialize in trauma, women's issues, anxiety, depression, relationships, EMDR, and lately I have been specializing in the intersection of mental health and anti-Semitism and Jewish cultural competency, and I am the founder of Kesher Shalom Projects. Thank you so much for joining us today at this important session. Why are we here today, and why is it important? Well, one of the things as a social worker that I am very passionate about is the idea of cultural competency. Cultural competency is a universal issue as all healthcare providers. It's understanding the diverse identities, and understanding identities is core to healthcare. This presentation is focusing on Jewish identity today, not because it's more important than any other identity, but because it's often misunderstood and overlooked in DEI and in other settings. It's incredibly relevant due to recent events, and these principles apply across all cultural groups. This is about inclusion, not about exception. Why does this matter? Why does anti-Semitism, trauma, and healthcare matter, and why does it matter today? Anti-Semitism is rising rapidly today. Since October 7th of 2023, the United States alone has seen approximately 388%, and different, depending where you get statistics, it's over 400% spike in reported anti-Semitic incidences in the weeks following the attack on Israel, covering hate crimes and harassment and vandalism. Now remember, the Jewish population in the United States makes a mere 2.5% of the population, and yet we are receiving over 60% of the hate crimes. Jewish patients are carrying visible and invisible wounds, generations of trauma combined with intensified fears of bias and exclusion shape how our Jewish clients and patients are experiencing our healthcare today. Cultural competence is essential for ethical care. Understanding Jewish history, identity, and trauma is critical to building trust and delivering safe and respectable and effective healthcare. You coming here today for this presentation is an important step in delivering effective care. Thank you so much for being here for this presentation. The impact of Jewish identity in healthcare today is so important because our Jewish clients have a fear of disclosing their identity. They're afraid of their identity because they're afraid of avoiding bias or misunderstanding. Jewish clients are showing a distrust in the systems. Our historical trauma has shaped skepticism towards care. The exclusion of DEI efforts for Jewish needs has been shown to show that the history and the identity has been erased. There's an assumption about Jewish privilege that undermines sensitivity in the care, dismissive of cultural needs, discomfort with Israel and Zionism, and we're going to explain what that really means. There's a lack of curiosity when providers avoid asking questions that need to be asked. Patients feel unseen and unheard, and that can impact safety, trust, and engagement. And we know that that's not what you want because you came here as a healthcare provider to provide safety, trust, and quality care to all of our clients and patients. What we want to do and what cultural competency is all about is bridging that gap. To understand the client's world, we must first examine the lens in which we see it. We all come to the world with our own natural bias, and we have to be clear what that is and really understand what that is so that we can serve our clients the best way we can. Cultural competency is about building compassionate empathy. Understanding and knowing someone creates a connection and a desire to help a person in distress. After all, isn't that why you chose your profession in the first place? Is to help somebody and to create these connections. So we want to act with compassion, and acting with compassion is what builds that bridge of understanding. So what we have to do is first take a step back. I want you to pause this video for a minute. What do you think it means to be Jewish? That's a big word. So many people have an idea of what does it mean to be Jewish. Pause the video, think about it. Hi, I'm back. Is Jewish a nationality? Is it a religion? Is it ethnicity? What does it mean to be Jewish? That is a question. And that's a question that's kind of hard to understand. Because the truth is, Judaism predates the modern concepts of religion and ethnicity. And it's really much more accurate to call it a peoplehood or a tribe. In sociology, it's actually called an ethno-religion, a group of people who share an ancestry, a faith, a homeland, and a history. And all of this is intertwined. And it's in Hebrew, the word is am, a people. And that's what makes it a really kind of a hard thing from an outsider to understand. It's not just a religion. It's deeper than that, and it's complicated because some people will relate to one part and some people will relate to another part. So when we're working with Jewish clients, we need to understand what does Judaism mean to them and how do they define their identity. And what's really complicated about the Jews is it's so global and it's so diverse, and there's so many different types of Jews, and there's so many different types of ethnicities within being Jewish. We have Ashkenazi Jews, which are white appearing. I am an Ashkenazi Jew. It means that after my people were expelled from the Middle East, from the land that's now known as Israel, we were expelled to European areas. And we may appear white appearing. Sephardi Jews were expelled to more Spanish areas, as Mizrahi were more North African and in Arab cultures. Ethiopian was from Ethiopia, and Bukharian went into Asia and Russia cultures. And what that means is Judaism and Jews, because they were dispelled all over lands, have so many different kinds of cultures and diversity within being Judaism. And in fact, Ashkenazi Jews are the minority of Jews around the world. So to say that Jews are one type of people is such a myth that needs to be dispelled. We are all and above and everything in between. Judaism started approximately 4,000 years ago, and it is among the earliest of the monotheistic religions. And what does that mean? In a world that was barbaric 4,000 years ago, in a world that none of us could truly understand, when they started to believe in one God and started teaching a moral responsibility and a universal ethical standard, this was a brand new concept that was really brought into the world. According to Jewish tradition, the matriarch and the patriarch, Abraham and Sarah, brought these concepts in, and the Jewish people can trace their origins now to the land that's now known as Israel. It was previously known as Canaan, later as Judea. Under Roman rule, the region was then renamed Palestine. So all these ideas of what this land was named, it had so many different names. But right now, it does spark a lot of controversy. The Jewish tradition speaks of this idea of having this covenant, this agreement with God, higher power, whatever you would like to call it, which promises to bless the descendants of Abraham and Sarah while the people commit to this ethical living and commandments and maintaining rituals. And that's really the foundation of how Judaism and Jewish identity started 4,000 years ago. But the foundational story is really a beautiful story of freedom and is liberation and overcoming hardship, because the foundational story of when Jews actually became a people is the famous story of when Jews left Egypt under the rulership of the Pharaoh, and they left slavery. And that's when the Jews really became a people, when they came to something called Mount Sinai. And in Christianity, this is also part of the legend. And that's when they were under the mountain and given basically the Ten Commandments with their leader Moses. But what were the Ten Commandments really? The Ten Commandments were really a set of ideas that really gave the Jewish people an identity, a purpose, and an idea that they were a community and a sense of belonging. And that's what really shaped the foundation, that they were liberated and that they can overcome hardship, and they really were given this identity and this purpose in the world, and that they have this belonging to each other. But as the years have shaped, Jews have a variety of different ways of expressing their Judaism. As I said, not everybody really relates to the religious part of Judaism. There's many Jews today that are really not practicing, that don't relate to the religion. But there's, even within the religion, you have Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Conservative, and believe it or not, Orthodox Judaism can range from modern Orthodox to Hasidic Orthodox, where Hasidim tend to be a little bit more isolated from the modern day world, and they may abstain from internet, popular culture. They might be a little bit more insular in the way that they dress. You may not see them, in our regular shopping malls and so forth. Modern Orthodox, you may not even recognize as modern Orthodox because they are very much integrated into everyday life, and they may be at the conference with you right now as well. The traditional definition is that you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish, meaning you cannot necessarily change the fact that you're Jewish if your mother is Jewish. However, some Jews identify as Jewish if one parent was raised Jewish. That has happened in the last 100 years, especially if they were raised as Jewish. And there's people who are Jewish by choice. They have chosen to convert to Judaism. But one piece I really want to point out that really makes Judaism a little bit different than other religions is Judaism does not seek out converts. In fact, they often dissuade people from converting to Judaism. And that's one thing that makes it a little bit different. But people can choose to become part of this tribe, this people, and there's many different ways of practicing Judaism. But the people that will identify themselves as a little bit more observant or traditional or whatever terminology they may want to use, these are the things that you should know just to be a little bit more culturally competent when working with these clients. So some of them will have something called kosher, which is dietary restrictions. And you don't need to know all the details, but one of the things you just need to know as a healthcare practitioner is not to take it personally if they can't eat the food. And if it's your colleagues and you're planning a conference or some kind of event, you could just approach them and say, would you like me to make arrangements for kosher food available for this conference so that people could feel comfortable participating, or make sure that they feel comfortable participating. There's a concept called Sabbath, so that would be Friday night from sundown to Saturday night to sundown, where they will abstain from using certain things like driving, electronics. They may not return your phone calls or emails. That is not something to take personally. That's just part of the observance. And if this is a colleague, something you should know is they will make the time up work-wise, but it is something to be respectful, and it is part of the tradition. Dressing modestly has been something that is handed down, and what that means is going to vary, again, based on the level of observance. But it is something that, it is part of the Jewish tradition. It is something that has been handed down, that there's an idea that being dressed modest is a part of being dignified. And one of the things that it may appear is that you may see, if you're working with somebody who's ultra religious, they may not want to be alone or shake hands with opposite gender practitioners. Again, it's not something to be offended by. It's just something to be aware of and understand. The other thing that's really interesting about the Jewish culture is that they have a language that's an ancient language that's been passed down for 3,000 years, and it's still very much alive today. And it's alive in the daily prayers. And there may be some times where, especially those people that are observant, they may need to take breaks during the day to observe the daily prayers. services throughout the day. And again, it's just something to be aware of, to be culturally competent that this is part of the culture, and not to be offended if they say, I need to take a break to do my daily prayer. I'll be back in 15 minutes. One of the things I wanted to present so that you really understand who we are is Jewish joy, and the beauty of the Jewish life cycle, and how much the life cycle is about the family and about connecting to each other and about celebrations and coming together in our joy and in our sadness. And in our joy and in our sadness, we're also reminded how we are connected to that land that is known as Israel, or Judea and Samaria, Canaan, so forth. So from the very beginning, for a boy, we have something called a Brit Milah, and for a girl, we have a naming ceremony. For a boy, it's 8 days after. And even on that joy, we are reminded about longing to come back to that land of Israel. We have a coming of age at 12 or 13 for bar, bat mitzvah, boys and girls, where they are now, we say coming into adulthood, but they're really coming into the idea where they are taking on their their Jewish identity onto their own. Even in marriage, if anybody's ever attended a Jewish ceremony, there's this beautiful canopy that it's called a chuppah that people will get married under. And even in our greatest joy, there'll be often like a glass that is smashed under the joy to remind us that we're still a little bit sad, that we are longing for our land. But one of the things that's really amazing is even in the death and the mourning, there's this period called Shiva where the community comes together to support somebody who's really going through a hard time. So there's this Jewish life cycle that is really about family, about joy, and about community, and about how all of this is a really essential pieces of the Jewish lifestyle. All of our Jewish holidays, and that's something that's really hard for maybe somebody from the outside to understand, is we have a lot of Jewish holidays, much more so than other religions. But there's 3 essential themes to our Jewish holidays. There's land, there's survival, and there's identity. And one of the ongoing themes about our holidays is the famous joke is, they tried to destroy us, we survived, oy vey, let's eat. And it's not funny, but it's funny, but it's true. And that's one of the ongoing themes, but some of them are also about this idea of renewal and survival. So we have, and also our holidays are based on a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. And that's something that makes the Jewish identity a little bit different. So you'll see that the Jewish dates don't always line up with the same calendar dates. And that could be a little bit confusing for other people, like why does Rosh Hashanah doesn't line up and why Hanukkah doesn't always line up with Christmas this year. And that might be a little bit confusing to other people, and that's okay. But it's just something just to be aware of, that these holidays very much are about our connection to the land of Israel, very much about our identity, and very much about the fact that we've had to survive over and over and over again, and that the Jewish identity is very much one about resilience and survival. In our handouts that we will be providing you, you'll have much more details about the holidays as well. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of an oversight of what the Jewish ideals are about in our ideology. Because obviously we can't go through everything. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an oversight so you understand who we are. I think one of the misconceptions is people just hear about who we are in terms of the Holocaust and our persecution. But I want you to know who we are. We have these life cycles, we have these holidays, and what do we really believe in? So I told you about monotheism, this one God, this special covenant that we have with this God to bring in ethical, moral standards and to live a righteous and just life. And that righteous and just life isn't just about for our own tribe, but how do we spread that to other people? We have this idea of sanctity of life, prioritizing and preserving life of all above all. So even when I told you the Sabbath, in terms of like we restrain from certain things, saving life comes above all. So even the most Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox person, if somebody's life is in terms, they will pick up the phone and call the ambulance if there's something life-threatening or even just slightly dangerous. We have a very strong sense of communal responsibility that with and beyond the Jewish community. So when somebody should have a baby, meals are sent to take care of that family. Babysitters come to the homes in the more religious or observant homes. When somebody is sick, the family is taken care of. This communal responsibility is something that's taken very, very seriously. One of the things that has always been a Jewish value, and I think this is also part of what the prejudice of Judaism has led, is this idea of studying and learning, lifelong commitment, education, and spiritual growth, and really studying the text and being literate has been in the Jewish value system for thousands of years. Now, that might not seem like a big idea, but that up until hundreds of years ago, the average person was not literate. And the idea of being literate is part of what contributed to what we call Jewish success. And that also has led a little bit to the envy of Jewish success. But this has always been part of the ideals that literacy, learning the text from the inside, and not just hearing it from our religious leaders passed down, but really understanding from the inside and learning it yourself, has been a Jewish idea. Social justice, we also call it tikkun olam, the obligation to repair the world and do good deeds, not just for the Jews, but for others, has been a very big part, especially as we talk about conservative and reform Judaism, has been a very big part of the Jewish ideals. And if you look at all of the civil rights movements, especially in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, the Jewish people have been behind and supporting every civil rights movement from the beginning because it's such a part of the Jewish value system. And again, this idea of not proselytizing, not seeking out converts, because there's a respect that we're like the original, you do you, we do me, and that's okay. Everyone can have their own path. There's many different paths of spirituality, but we just want you to respect that we have our own path, and that's okay. It's not okay to tell somebody that if you're not on my path, then you're going to go, then you're going to go somewhere. So some more of our values. Again, the full list will be provided for you in your handout. But there is this very, very deep concept that we are one people. This Klal Yisrael. You will hear this slogan, Am Yisrael Chai. All of Yisrael forever, one people. And that means we do feel very much connected. So when we hear one Jew from around the world is in pain, we do feel it. I feel it very much in my heart when one person from around the world is in pain. Family, kindness, justice. This idea of visiting and caring for the sick, it seems so obvious, especially I'm talking to you at a healthcare convention. But do you know that up until a couple of hundred years ago, this was not an obvious concept? This was not an obvious concept in a very barbaric world thousands of years ago. People it was very much like, well, you're sick, we're going to move on. And especially caring for sick outside of your tribe. Hospitality, taking in strangers. This was always a part of the Jewish culture because there was a part of the Jewish culture where people would return to Jerusalem, to the temple 3 times a year, and people would just have hospitality to anybody that would want to come into their homes. The idea of peace and honor and joy and seeking forgiveness if you had hurt somebody. These are all the concepts that the Jewish people had brought into the world thousands of years ago that really weren't there. The Jewish impact on today's society is something that we need to look onto. When we talk about Western values, when we talk about Judeo-Christian values, this is where it came from. So when we talk about anti-Semitism and we talk about the Jewish people, I want you to think about what you're really putting the hate on. This ethical standard, this emphasis on justice and compassion, fairness, inclusivity, collective action for social issues. And the most important thing that Jewish impact brought on society is critical thinking, valuing diverse perspectives. This started from Talmudic studying, but it really is even impacting in the way today the American court system is based. When the American court system is based, we still look at the different rulings, because just because we don't rule this way, we still have value into looking at why somebody might have had this opinion. The idea of respecting an opinion that you may not agree with and having that civil discourse, this came from Jewish values, and this is an important piece of Western society. This is an important part of the Jewish impact on society. That pluralism, respecting that diversity and individual dignity. And believe it or not, women's rights. Now, some of the rights and some of the things that we could talk about that Judaism brought into the world thousands of years ago may seem out of date today. For example, there was a marriage contract to protect women's rights. If I were to read it, it's called a ketubah, it's the marriage contract. It could seem very out of date to a modern woman, especially we're all healthcare providers, so at minimally we all have a master's degree. But even the idea that they were looking at women's rights and to protect women's rights and that women had the right to ask for a divorce thousands of years ago should be mind-blowing to you to think of today. But when you look at the numbers, we are the minority of the minority. To popularization, but the representation in significant fields and the impact on the world is so much higher. And in fact, when we talk about Nobel Prizes, we have represented over a quarter of the Nobel Peace Prize winners. So again, when we look at it in terms of American population, I just want you to look at the statistics. This is just based on Google, so you could just Google it yourself. One of the biggest myths is that Jews are not a minority, or they don't count as a minority or a marginalized population. But I'm going to let the numbers speak for itself. And the numbers don't lie. So let's go over some of the most misunderstood concepts that I think twist things around. This idea about the Jewish people as the chosen people. It doesn't mean that we feel that we're better than the other people. It's not about superiority. It's about responsibility. And one of the best ways and one of the most analogies that I use is I'm a mother. I have 3 kids. So anybody who's a parent can understand this. And like a younger sibling will say, well, it's not fair. How come my older sibling can do this? Well, it's not that your older sibling can do something that you can't do. Your older sibling also has more responsibilities. Maybe my oldest has to also babysit. Maybe my oldest also has to clean up for dinner or make dinner or run to the grocery store. It means chosen to live as a moral example and to stand up for justice. So it's not necessarily about superiority. It's about having a role in this world in terms of this ethical responsibility. And it's respecting other people's paths as well. I want us to take a pause right now, because there's another term that I think gets twisted, and it's a really, can like for some people be like a hot topic, this term Zionism. I want you to pause your video for a minute. I want you to write down 3 thoughts when you think of the term Zionism. Okay, we're back. What were your thoughts? I'm going to define Zionism. Let's see if they matched. Zionism is simply the belief that the Jewish people have the right to live safely and freely in their ancestral homeland. That's it. Simple. The core principles are about our shared history, belonging. I'm a trauma therapist, so it's all about our sense of safety, self-determination, and continuing our heritage. It's not about excluding the rights of others, and it does not mean that we can't criticize the modern-day state of Israel. In fact, that's what a democracy means. Can you honestly say that you don't have criticisms for America, for the American president, for any other democracy? If you can't say that if you can't sit here and say that you don't honestly have criticisms for your own country, then of course you can, and you can criticize your own country, but you would never say your country doesn't have the right to exist. So it doesn't mean we can't criticize the modern state of Israel, but it does mean when you have a different standard for this state of Israel, that's where it gets a little bit twisted. It's just that the Jewish people have the right to live safely in their homeland, and it also means other people can live safely in their homeland as long as they would be law-abiding citizens of the homeland. Same thing with America and Canada. As long as you want to be a law-abiding citizen of the country, we all have to follow the laws of our country. We may not all agree with every law of every country. So I can't obviously teach you the entire history of the Jewish people. That's almost a whole college course or maybe a college PhD program into itself. But I do want to reiterate that we have 4,000 years of persecution that is still impacting the Jewish people and our intergenerational trauma, and it still impacts how it is perceived in healthcare today. We will have some more details in your handout that's available to you. The things that I do want to point out that are important to understand is that the Jews were enslaved not just in Egypt, but they were enslaved many times throughout history. Specifically, the Sephardi and the Mizrahi Jews were put into slavery many times over. There was persecutions over and over again, and they were expelled over and over again. What you do need to understand is that how that impacts trauma, specifically our intergenerational trauma, and how it is confirmed through epigenetics and psychology, and how that will be transformed when clients come to you as Jewish healthcare patients. They will be coming with heightened vigilance and sometimes mistrust. And there's going to be a deep sensitivity to exclusion and invalidation. And there are unique trauma responses tied to identity. And we're just asking you for you to be a little bit sensitive, just like you would be to any other marginalized population that has experienced so much intergenerational trauma. And we just want to raise that awareness. Again, I can't go over 4,000 years of history, but we can give you many different resources that will be in your handouts today.
Now we will move to the second part of the presentation, the impact of anti-Semitism on our colleagues. Prompted by reported incidents of anti-Semitism directed towards Jewish genetic counselors, including social media posts made by fellow genetic counselor colleagues, an IRB-approved study was initiated to examine the experiences of Jewish genetic counselors and students. The study utilized an anonymous online survey distributed between April and June 2025, employing convenience and snowball sampling methods. Participants were asked about their experiences with anti-Semitism and whether they felt the need to hide their Jewish identity. This presentation will share preliminary qualitative and quantitative findings from this study. Please note that these results are unpublished and may not be shared or distributed. On this first slide, we see responses to open-ended questions made by Jewish genetic counselors and genetic counseling students. This first quote is from a genetic counselor with 11 to 15 years of experience who said, "A fellow student made a comment about how much class I was missing due to Jewish holidays. She said if it were her, she would not choose to miss any school. She failed to understand that it's not a choice for me." This next quote is from a genetic counselor with less than 5 years of experience who said, "My manager made a comment about how her Jewish patients tend to be more high maintenance. She did not know I was Jewish, and I never told her after this incident." This quote's from another genetic counselor with 11 to 15 years of experience who said, "A geneticist that I worked with was walking me through the labor and delivery floor on our way back from a consult in the NICU. And he commented that soon I will be there having lots of babies like the rest of the Orthodox women. I was not married at the time, and the comment felt both unprofessional and full of assumptions about who I was just based on my faith and identity. I did not report this incident." And finally, from a genetic counselor, also with less than 5 years of experience, who said, "I'm scared to tell people that I vacationed in Israel. I'm scared to tell people that I want to move there one day." Now we will view an acted vignette based on an actual experience of a genetic counseling student.
MN, a second-year genetic counseling student, is taking a family history during a cancer genetic counseling session. The student is Jewish, but does not wear anything identifying. MN has not shared that they are Jewish with their clinical supervisor. MN is midway through their second rotation and has a comfortable working relationship with their supervisor, AB. MN is taking the family history for a couple. The patient presents because of a family history of breast cancer. At the conclusion of the pedigree, the student asks about the ancestry of the family and inquires if the patient has any Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. The patient's partner gets heated and exclaims, "Gosh, I hope not. Why would you ask something like that?" The student is shocked by the outburst of the previously mild partner and observes the remainder of the session, although she had been planning to lead the rest of the session. Seeing the shock, AB takes over the appointment, which was uneventful. The student then engages with AB. "Hey, can I talk with you about the case this morning?"
Sure, which one?
"The session with Mr. and Mrs. W."
Yes, let's talk about that together. I was surprised that you didn't lead the rest of the session after the pedigree like we planned. What was happening for you?
Well, I haven't really thought about the impact of my background when working with patients until now. I've been hesitant to share that I am Jewish.
I see now why Mr. W's response during the pedigree was so difficult, and I'm sorry that I didn't recognize that sooner. I understand it's been hard to share your Jewish identity, and I'm grateful that you felt comfortable with me to share that today. When I've worked with other students who've experienced microaggressions in clinic, it can be helpful to talk through them together and make a plan to move forward.
Thank you for your support.
Absolutely. Let's take a minute to pause and reflect on that scenario. What do you think about the supervisor not checking in with the student after the session? And the next question is, what if in this scenario the supervisor took note of Mr. W's harsh response in the session? What could have happened? And how do you make space for students to share their identities when working with them as clinical supervisors? And in what ways could this scenario have been different if the supervisor knew the student's identity ahead of time? After that reflection, some thoughts that came to mind for me was, given this was a second year student who was well into her rotation, it would have been reasonable for the supervisor to initiate a conversation about what was happening for the student. And it's quite possible that there was not a break between appointments to have this discussion yet, or perhaps the supervisor AB was waiting for just the right moment. Whether or not the supervisor was Jewish herself or himself, she could still register the harsh response of the patient. Initiating identity discussions in genetic counseling is not well studied, and it can be vulnerable for learners to initiate these conversations. There are some genetic counseling resources for culture and supervision that include the addressing framework, and this is described by McFarlane and Redlinger Grossi. And this model is applied to genetic counseling and addresses 9 different aspects of identity, which are listed here. And thinking through scenarios like this may help support both clinical supervisors and our students. Thanks for participating in this session today.
As noted earlier, this scenario was not simply hypothetical. These statistics are from preliminary analyses of data collected as part of the Jewish Genetic Counselor Study, highlighting the experiences of Jewish genetic counseling students. 31% of graduate genetic counseling students felt the need to hide their Jewish identity while in graduate school. 50% felt they needed additional support to a great extent or somewhat on a Likert scale in graduate school due to their Jewish identity. 77% of genetic counseling students experienced some form of microaggression or Jewish trope while at graduate school. And 46% of Jewish genetic counseling students have felt unsafe or threatened due to the rise in antisemitism and Jewish hate. And here are more responses to open-ended questions in the survey by Jewish genetic counseling participants of the study, recalling their experience when asking their patients about their ancestry. I had a patient share that, yuck, of course not. They did not have Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. When asking patients about Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, one told me that his family, quote unquote, fought against that in Germany. Others made comments such as, no, but I do really like bagels, etc. Now we return back to Malka Shah as she explains what anti-Semitism is, how to recognize it, and how we all may work together to combat it.
So this is bringing us to what is anti-Semitism? And why is it something that is so debated, and why is it so controversial? Because it should not be something so controversial. Anti-Semitism is this tool, this weapon of division. But the simple form is that it's any kind of hostility or prejudice or discrimination against the Jewish people or institutions based on any of our ethnicity, religion, nationhood. Anytime you have any kind of hostility or prejudice, that's where it's a problem. We're healthcare providers. Anytime you use the word all of the to apply to any group, we have a problem. Because when, as healthcare providers, when there's a bias that shapes perception, it harms our trust and treatment, and it can affect our healthcare outcome. And anti-Semitism is more than just hate. It's a mirror of society's darkest fears and crimes. It's called the world's oldest hate, but it functions like propaganda, and it's been embedded in our society for longer than we can imagine. It adapts by mutating to fit the cultural movement at the time, and it's sneaky, and it reinvents itself. Once it was specifically about religion, then it was about ethnicity, and today it's about the peoplehood and the Jewish state. It's about scapegoating, and it distorts itself, and it distorts Jewish identity, and it distorts our values, and it projects itself onto other people, and it projects society's shame and fear onto the Jews because we are the easiest target, because we're such a small population, and so many people have not even met a Jew in the world. The paradox, the duplicity of anti-Semitism is almost laughable on what it is. We're so powerful, we're so controlling, we're the oppressors, but yet at the same time, we're not worthy, we're too weak. And Jews within ourselves have the same paradox. Jews don't often want to admit that we're marginalized, that we need help, and don't often want to consider ourselves part of a minority or want to ask for help. But here's the thing is you can't hide, because due to the deep hatred, Jews have had no choice. They've had to been forced to either excel or to be erased. There has been no forced. And that is something that just shatters. This mirror is something that just shatters and it fractures identities. Anti-Jew versus anti-Judaism. Throughout history, Jews were always attacked for who they were. It doesn't discriminate on religious practices, on skin color, on status in society. Jews can never hide who they are. It doesn't matter what kind of Jew they are. It doesn't matter if the Jew tried to convert. Tradition will say that you're a Jew based on your mother, but they were still rounded up whether if one grandparent was Jewish or not. Assimilation never guaranteed safety. Actually, history has proven the more assimilated, the more integrated, the more successful Jews are in society, historically, is when we see the rise in anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism can range from harmless misrepresentation, a seamless little joke in Hollywood, to double standards, to genocidal ideations. We're going to take a pause. I want you to write down for a minute, what are some of the Jewish stereotypes that you've heard? What are the things that you think about when you think about Jews? Take a pause, write it down. Hi, I'm back. Let's see if what you wrote matches what I'm going to discuss. Why the Jews? So I've summed it up very nicely. Obviously, we can't go through everything, but some of the common myths is this idea that Jews are so wealthy and control finance and influence the media and politics. Really? If we really can control the media, why is the media misrepresenting us and putting us in such a negative light? Racial inferiority, the pseudoscience that our genes that we're not genetically equal. Scapegoating, blaming society for society's problems, the secret control, the manipulation. These things will always shift and change forms, blaming society for societal problems. So in World War II, with the Nazi area, we weren't Aryan enough. Now, all of a sudden, we are colonizers. It will just always shift for whatever society decides is society's problems. The blood libel is something that has always shifted as well. It started in medieval ages with a rumor that started, and now it continues. Deicide. Deicide is not simply the idea that the Jews may or may not have been responsible for Jesus' demise, which it wasn't. It was actually the Romans. But deicide is this idea that the Jews don't want to actually practice Christianity. The idea that the Jews don't want to actually practice Islam. The Jews want to practice Judaism, and that should just be okay. But the idea of not just that the Jews necessarily killed Jesus, but the idea that the Jews are rejecting somebody else's God is something that also can lead to anti-Semitism. And this idea of dual loyalty, this idea of but they're loyal to Israel and America, or Israel and Canada. I'm going to debunk that myth as well. Again, as a parent, I have 3 kids. I don't love one kid more than the other. And guess what? How many people in America have more than one citizenship, not just Jewish people? So you can have dual loyalty, and it doesn't take away from any loyalty as well. So these are some of the common myths. And then we also have these identity factors that have caused a lot of, for whatever reason, the strong cultural and religious identity has stayed present for thousands of years. This commitment to the tradition, the work ethic, and the educational achievements. This idea of being a successful minority. Not look at what happened 70 years ago. Most Jews arrived here in America as immigrants on the back of the Holocaust, and have now obtained enormous success. And that is something that people find very envious. But it's the idea that instead of taking this idea of saying we're victims, we just pick up our backs, and this idea of resiliency has been a defining feature of the Jewish people, but it's been a defining feature of envy. This resilience and survival, and as we discussed, this misunderstood concepts of the chosen people and Zionism. And what I call the D's of anti-Semitism. This again is going to be in your handout, this particular sheet. This is where anti-Semitism does make itself a little bit different from other forms of racism. This disinformation, the spreading the falsehoods about the Jewish people in history, the defamation, the slander through stereotypes and accusations, manipulation of the facts, double standards, holding Jews or even the Jewish state to a different set of standards than other people in other nations, denial of the Jewish people and the Jewish right to self-determination, erasing Jewish experiences and Jewish history. And the 2 biggest ones are demonizing and dehumanizing. Because when somebody's demonized, they're dangerous, they're in control, they're oppressors, and they need to be stopped. And when they're less than, then they don't matter. Then they don't deserve the same treatment as other people. And what that means is it allows people to project their fear, their guilt, their envy, and that will fuel blame and resentment onto the Jewish people. And that level of moral clarity threatens people who are invested in injustice and ambiguity. When you are invested in having injustice and ambiguity, and you have people who have strong moral clarity, it's going to threaten them. Cultures that want to detach from identity and purpose. Remember I said that one of the defining factors of Judaism is this identity, purpose, and peoplehood. It will be considered a threat, and it will allow them to project their fear and their guilt. And when people are holding on to their traditions and to their collective memory, it disrupts people from denying the historical erasure. Intellectual inquiry and critical thinking and values now gets twisted into allowing people to suppress dissent. So cultures who want to criticize this narrative of blaming other people all of a sudden are blamed as the bad guy and become this scapegoat. I want you to really think about that, because if people could really learn to manage their own fear and guilt and learn to be able to manage their own, then we wouldn't have blame and resentment into society. So how does this really approach? So first, it starts with this lack of historical education, where people don't really understand the history. And we have a society that declines critical thinking, and we're really seeing that especially in a post-pandemic world. Then it leads to society's instability and a fear. And when we have a society that is unstable and has fear, it allows for society to rise to extremism. This is something that we should all be really scared of. Then we have the factor of excluding Jewish cultural competency from the DEI framework. Then we have silence and gaslighting. And then we weaponize human rights. And before we know it, we normalize anti-Semitism. It's become a normalized piece, and it's justified. And what we have is this tornado that's just allowing it to happen. But all of this should scare you, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So let's go exactly, how are these Jewish values being hijacked? We talked about the Jewish value, some of the Jewish values. So one of them is this idea of giving charity, of generosity, this ethical obligation to give charity gets distorted into Jews are controlling the banks and are money hungry. This idea of education, of lifelong learning, gets distorted into Jews are know-it-alls and manipulative or elitist. Successful is a survival mechanism and a strategy while they were kicked out of their land. Gets distorted to controlling everything. A commitment to going back to their land of Israel, historical and spiritual homeland, all of a sudden gets distorted into colonizer and being disloyal. The idea of peoplehood, collective responsibility, gets distorted to conspiracy or global coordination. When you don't really understand what Jewish values are, they're more likely to get twisted into fear. Because fear is what fears it. It was what spews it. So what is this anti-Zionism, and how did that get twisted? Zionism, as I said, is an ancient part of Judaism. It's not a modern political movement. It reflects the Jewish people's deep connection to their ancestral homeland, which I talked about. And it's even woven into our prayers, our holidays, and our daily lives. In fact, almost every temple, religious institution, the prayer is centered towards Jerusalem. So wherever part of the world you go to, and the Jews are facing to pray, they're praying towards Jerusalem. But over time, this concept of Zionism has been twisted and recast as colonialism, racism, supremacy, and recently as a symbol of global evil. It's not criticism. That's how people got demonized. Imagine this idea that you have this concept that's really about your safety, about your pride, and now it's being recast as being evil. Well, how are your Jewish clients feeling? They're feeling betrayed. They're feeling unsafe and isolated, and they don't know who they could trust. And it's a really frightening feeling for most Jews in a post-10/7 world. Who can I trust? I'm meeting my healthcare provider for the first time. How do I know that I could trust you? Well, what if you're wearing a symbol that says that you believe in anti-Zionism? But Zionism represents my sense of safety. That can trigger a reaction that will represent like a trauma reaction into your client, because it's for our sense of safety. And I want you to just really be very culturally sensitive to what that means, because that is going to be perceived as anti-Semitism to your clients. It's going to be perceived as harmful to your clients. This idea that it is not anti-Semitism is also part of the distortion, and it's also part of the manipulation, because Zionism is part of the culture, and it is part of our sense of safetyness. And when you can justify all of these things because somebody's dehumanized or because they're less than, and you've projected all of this, that's when people have now engaged in something called moral disengagement. It's this psychological process of convincing yourself that ethical standards do not apply to a specific context or group of people. And that allows people to justify their behavior. They deserved it. I was just following orders. They needed to be stopped. It depends on the context. I didn't really mean it. Oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. We've all heard these lines. Where have you heard these lines before? Those are justifications for doing things that are immoral. And everybody has the ability to enter into moral disengagement. And that's why we should all be very much alarmed. That right now we're talking about anti-Semitism, but I want you to think about it as a society as a whole. That this idea of this distortion of consequences, it wasn't that big of a deal. They needed to be stopped. They're less than. They deserved it. This is how moral disengagement starts. And it starts from words, and it ends up to violence, and it becomes like a domino effect. It starts with stereotypes, double standards. It starts with verbal attacks, denying opportunities, anti-Israel segments, public demonstrations, boycotts. Cyber hate never hurt anybody, right? Wrong. Vandalism, violence. So let's wipe out all of the Jews. Let's wipe out all of that particular group of people. How your Jewish clients or coworkers may be feeling can be any and all of the above. Some might be feeling shame and doubt, anxiety and depression. There's a sense of loss and grief. Our sense of stability has been taken away. Fears about personal safety, trust, betrayal, relationships, loss of former safe spaces and communities, especially clients who have dual identities. Progressive clients have lost spaces. There's certain spaces that maybe they identify as Jewish and something else, and now no longer they're not welcome in that other space. They could start to feel more irritable and frustrated, and they may look rageful and anger. They will be hypervigilant. It will be shown in their nervous system, and it can impact the trauma response. I want us to pause for a minute. Imagine for 1 minute. Your history was distorted. Your history was erased. Your culture, your religious values were mocked. I work with a lot of college students in New York. They describe it feeling very foggy and not able to think straight. What if your lived experience was questioned? What if your concerns were minimized? And what if they were minimized by the people that you were supposed to trust? By a therapist, by a professor, by a guidance counselor, by a healthcare provider? How would that impact your sense of safety and engagement in support systems? Take a minute, pause this video. I invite you to write down your first reactions to what I'm saying. Okay, I'm back. Wasn't easy to think about that, was it? Thank you for taking that moment. Okay, so where can we go from here? Great question. So here's a few pointers on how to support our Jewish clients and colleagues. It's very simple. Start with honoring the religious and cultural needs. Be a little bit more flexible with holidays, dietary laws, and prayer time. Take anti-Semitism seriously. Address stereotypes. Silence causes harm. Be aware of comparative suffering. Stop this whataboutisms. Don't assume background or identity. Jewish identity is culturally and ethnically diverse. Lead with curiosity, not with cancellation. Be kind. Curiosity and kindness will go a long way. Be aware of intergenerational trauma. Historical harm can shape clinical narratives. include Jewish perspectives in DEI and cultural competency trainings. Thank you so much to the conference organizers for today's session. We really appreciate this space. Representation matters in training, policy, and care. Prioritize positive cultural attributions. Uplift the joy, the resilience, and tradition. Don't just talk about the Holocaust and persecution. Talk about who we are, what we've contributed. Share the Jewish joy and wonders about what's beautiful about being Jewish. How can we protect yourself from anti-Semitic propaganda? Okay, so this could be a whole lecture in and of itself. I'm just going to give you a little tips. Watch out for emotional manipulation. If it invokes outrage or moral superiority at the expense of an entire group, pause before reacting. You hit a red flag. Investigate the source. Is this a credible source or is it part of an agenda? Newsflash, TikTok is not a credible source. If you are seeing something on social media, stop. Look this person up. Look at their website. Look at their LinkedIn. Should you be learning about politics? Should you be learning about the Middle East from this person? If I am a music celebrity, am I really a credible source? Here I am. I'm Malka Shaw. I told you who I am. Do not trust me to tell you about politics. Do trust me to tell you about Jewish cultural competency or anything about mental health. That is my area of expertise. Do not trust me to do your genetics counseling because I am not a genetics counselor. Look them up. Know who your source is. Be cautious of comparative suffering. This is one of the most damaging pieces. When one group's trauma is dismissed because others have it worse, empathy is replaced with competition and propaganda wins. The whataboutisms is so painful. Two truths can be true at the same time. But when we do that, it takes away from that other person's pain. If you were going to visit somebody because they lost of somebody, you don't say, I'm sorry your dad died, my dog died. That's not helping anything. Be there for them in the moment and just validate. Validation and support. Notice when messages generalize. Anytime we hear all of the people, it moves us away from the truth. There is no such thing as all of the Jews, all of the Zionists, all of the people in Israel. Whatever group you belong to, I don't care, you belong to a pickleball league, and then one person in the pickleball league got arrested for something horrible. Would you like it if I say all the people in that pickleball league are this? No. Move away from that because that makes everything dehumanized. And learn about Jewish identity. The best defense is learning what Judaism is, what Zionism is, what Jewish culture is. Learn other cultures and speak up with care. Silence is compliance. You don't need to debate, but you can ask questions. Ask with care and compassion. Correct information and share credible sources. We live in this dangerous society of cancellation. I always say lead with curiosity, not with cancellation. Practical tools in professional spaces. Differentiate with intent from impact. Good intentions don't negate harm. Consult when you're unsure. Seek consultation to address blind spots. There's many people out there that are available for consultation. Use inclusive tools. Include Jewish case examples when you are doing educational frameworks. Debrief anti-Semitic related ruptures. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Acknowledge the comparative suffering and challenge systematic biases. We have to acknowledge that accountability takes practice. It's not about getting it perfect. Nobody's going to be perfect. Newsflash, I'm not perfect either. But it's about staying engaged when it matters most. We have to acknowledge power dynamics. If you're mentoring a student, if you're a professor, if you're a supervisor, acknowledge harm without being defensive. Humility goes a long way. Explore the intention. Utilize these moments for teaching and education. Commitment to ongoing learning about cultural competency and ongoing learning about our own bias is what's going to bridge those gaps. Make room in supervision and team spaces for complexity and discomfort. Once we can have that this complexity and discomfort, that's how we learn and we grow and we become better professionals and we become stronger. Center humility over certainty and remain open, curious, and willing to grow, because that's why we are here. Anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem. It's a society problem. It's an explosive domino effect. It fosters vulnerability. It encourages submissive behaviors. It attacks critical thinking, democratic values. It discredits authority, and it encourages radicalization. And that is not the world that any of us want to live in. We want to thank you so much for being here today and working with us today. Thank you so much for your participation. I want to give you, everyone, credit for taking time to be with us, and we hope that you continue to grow and learn and be better professionals, and that you are always in a place where you do the best by your clients. Thank you and have a great day.
Here we see some additional statistics from the Jewish GC study. These statistics represent the experiences of practicing Jewish genetic counselors who responded to the survey. 33% had said they felt they had to hide their Jewish identity at work. 52% reported receiving concerning comments or replies from patients when they asked about Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, which of course many genetic counselors do every day in their patient care roles. 55% reported feeling unsafe or threatened due to the rise in Jewish hate. 29% experienced being discounted for their Jewish identity during a multicultural dialogue. In other words, they reported that being Jewish was not seen as an ethnic minority group. 22% have been told they don't look Jewish or their name doesn't sound Jewish. And now we continue to the third and final part of our presentation, the impact of anti-Semitism on society. Sadly, the reported incidents of anti-Semitism to the Anti-Defamation League, also known as the ADL, have risen sharply in the past 2 years in the United States. These incidents of anti-Semitism occur in the form of harassment, vandalism, or even assault. As you can see by looking at this graph, the sharp increase in 2023 and 2024 compared to 2022 in the incidents of harassment, vandalism, and even assault. Here are examples of harassment, which occur in both physical and virtual public spaces, as well as privately through individuals receiving anti-Semitic messages directly. As seen in the video shown at the beginning of our presentation, incidents of vandalism, including the display of Nazi symbols, have increased significantly. You can see here that incidents of vandalism surged to 2,600 incidents in 2024, which is up 20% over the previous year. And perhaps most concerning, anti-Semitic rhetoric has resulted in an increase in physical assaults of American Jews just due to their identity. In 2024, 196 assaults occurred on Jewish individuals simply because they were Jewish. This is up 21% from the year before. Words do matter. These anti-Semitic incidents of harassment, vandalism, and assault occur in multiple places within our society, including our schools, our workplaces, and in public spaces, including even 17 incidents at Jewish cemeteries in 2024. Here are more examples of anti-Semitism and hate, which have the danger of being normalized in our society if we don't take action to condemn it. Tragically, anti-Semitism stems from multiple corners of our society, including the extreme right, as well as from the extreme left. Next, we will hear from Dr. Alan Shore, who will share some of the history of eugenics and how it was used to justify the atrocities of the Holocaust through dehumanization.
My name is Dr. Alan Shore. As you can see on the slide, I am a board-certified endocrinologist in 1986. I was chairman of the Institutional Review Board at St. Mary Medical Center in Langorton for over 30 years. My primary interest was in research and ethical behavior. And in this regard, I completed a master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies with a special interest in medical ethics approximately 1 year ago. My talk at this time is based on medical ethics, origins, and history. And briefly, I'd like to review medical ethics. It was first conceived by the ancient Greek culture, and it continued during the Roman Empire. As you can see, is the Hippocratic Oath, and Hippocrates developed this because the Romans distrusted the Greek physicians, not because of their knowledge, not because of their ability, but the fear that Greek physicians would use Roman citizens as guinea pigs to test out drugs and procedures. In order to prevent something like this from happening and to provide some trust within the two communities, Hippocrates developed an oath that created a framework of what was expected of the physician of that time. It is a holy covenant between physicians to patients that their bodies and confidences would be respected in specific ways. The basis of physician or healthcare individuals was that they respected the patient, they would do the help and do no harm, and confidentiality was quite important. If you were practicing surgery, you had to be a surgeon. If you were imparting medical skill and medical advice, you must be a physician. This is the basis of healthcare even today. One of the principles that borne out in the late 19th century and early 20th century was eugenics. And this is especially poignant for you as genetic counselors. The definition is the practice or advocacy of controlled selective breeding of human populations in order to improve populations' genetic composition. There was an application of genetic principles to race improvement. It was an academic theory that was introduced in the late 19th century in 1869, and ironically, the US and the UK were pioneers. What they argued is that biology could play a significant role in reconstructing society. Unfortunately, in the early 20th century, under the Third Reich and under Hitler, eugenic guided public policy and an altered perception of medical ethics became the norm, and what we called under race hygiene. This is what a consequence of what we call negative eugenics. As you can see here, this was a diagram of how to determine whether one was fully Aryan, one was mixed race, and one was Jewish. It looked quite complicated. It was complicated. It was difficult to determine, but the purpose was to root out those that were not considered pure. Even the US was involved in eugenics. You can see here that the Eugenic Society was in America. This was a display at Yale. Interesting enough, the American Breeders Magazine became the premier journal of genetics and eugenics. Today, you know it as the Journal of Heredity. The premier people within American medicine were also involved in eugenics. An article in the New England Journal of Medicine last year indicated even William Mayo, who was famous for his Minnesota clinic, was a proponent of eugenics. There were others who also proposed eugenics, and even negative eugenics. And they were the idea of selective breeding, elimination of those with disabilities, and elimination of those who did not feel to be a contributor to society. One of the things that we notice as far as genetics or eugenics is syndromes that were named for alleged Nazi physicians or collaborators. These were promoters of eugenics: Reiter's syndrome, Asperger's syndrome, Haller-Voorma-Spatz syndrome, Wegener's granulomatosis, Van Boger-Scherer-Epstein syndrome. These are very popular names that are still used today. The other is the Pernkopf Atlas. This was probably one of the premier atlases of human anatomy within the medical profession. It was very detailed, and it is even used today with caveats. As you notice that the individual who did this drawing signed his name with the swastika. And that's because many of these individuals who are seen within this atlas were victims of concentration camp. The other part of eugenics was Binding and Hosch. These were a German physician and a German lawyer. They published an article called Life Unworthy of Living. It was not only well received in Germany, but it was also well received within the UK and the US for a period of time. And the implication was that those who were disabled, those who were infirmed, those who had chronic diseases were considered foreign bodies in the social system. And Binding himself noted that this merely replaces the present cause of death with a different one that is painless. In other words, he advocated for euthanasia. Hosch also said the obligation of the physician to preserve and prolong life was given an exception if the killing was performed in the interest of serving the higher good. The result of this is the primary purpose of physicians within the Third Reich. The good of the bulk supersedes the welfare of the individual. What does this lead to? Well, this is the original pamphlet in English, explains the themes of the paper. And this is available to read within any library. What was the consequence of life unworthy of living? It led to sterilization laws. And be aware that sterilization laws were not only in Germany during the early 20th century, but there were sterilization laws within the UK and within the US. The sterilization laws within the Third Reich led to what we call the Axiom T4 program. That was the elimination of those deemed a burden to society, which led to a development of efficient killing methodology. First carbon monoxide, then eventually Zyklon B. The original intent was within children, and subsequently it was expanded to adults. And when the Catholic Church protested, they quote unquote eliminated the Axiom T4 program, but it continued for 3 more years. It was then taken to the concentration camps for the final solution. In addition, it allowed physicians at that time to conduct experimentation within camps. Now, the Germans weren't the only ones that developed this type of policy. The Japanese committed atrocities on Chinese based on eugenics as well. The Japanese considered the Chinese as logs, basically subhuman. And in many cases, both the Nazis and the Japanese competed on who could do better experiments. Was this an aberrant form of medical ethics or something else? It's interesting to note that physicians joined the Nazi Party earlier and in larger numbers than other professions. And there was a reason for that. During the Depression and during the times before the Third Reich, physicians were losing financial status. They were losing status within society. So the motivation for Nazi physicians was multi. It was some based on philosophy, others based on individual goals. Many considered their actions because of eugenics as morally acceptable. They considered themselves the good guys. One of the things you'll see in the next couple slides is a commentary by Karl Brandt at the Nuremberg trials. So there was financial benefit, there was prestige benefit, they felt that they were doing something morally good. And in many cases, they did not view their actions as anything but good. There was also anti-Semitism. Eugenics was the big role and the overall theme. and racial hygiene was an outgrowth of eugenics. In many cases, the Germans considered eugenics as scientific and advanced. It was a reform of the previous medical policies, and therefore they felt they were doing what was appropriate. They considered the Third Reich analogous to a living organism. Hitler in Mein Kampf said the Reich is a body, and physicians, nurses, and other healthcare individuals were the soldiers who protect it. He called them an essential to his Third Reich. Karl Brandt was actually the head physician within the Third Reich. He was a person who was classically trained. He was an individual who he considered himself quite moral. He also considered himself somewhat religious. But during the interviews and during the trial, he made the following statements. Human beings who cannot help themselves and whose tests show a life of suffering are to be given aid. This consideration was not inhuman. He never felt it was not ethical or was not immoral. He felt that what seemed necessary to him, that if anybody wants to judge the question of euthanasia, he should go into an insane asylum. He should stay there with the sick people for a few days and decide whether he was right or wrong. And then one could ask himself two questions. The first would be whether he would himself would like to live like that. And the second, would he ask one of his relatives to live that way, perhaps his child or his parents. He felt that he was doing himself, his patients a service, and his treatment was rational. He felt that he was doing what was right. He signed off on many of the experimentations. He signed off on many of the euthanasia. But this is an example of medical activism for political ideas. He took his classical training. He ignored the Hippocratic Oath, and he decided that he was going to advocate his duty to serve the body politic, ensured the life and health of the people and community. This led to the Holocaust. And what are the myths associated with medicine and the Holocaust? The one is the Holocaust is not unique. It's unique in the fact that there was a specific group of individuals who were targeted for extinction due to religion and beliefs. The Holocaust began with and was a military operation. Many say that the Holocaust began with 1939 taking over Poland and expanded because they Operation Barbarossa into the USSR. Unfortunately, they claimed they didn't have enough land for everyone. It was not a military operation. It was a progression of racial hygiene, and it was a progression of eugenics. The medical community did not support the killing. Many say that it was just a rogue group of physicians that were involved and that did not reflect the general policy within the German medical community. Actually, that's not true. The medical community and even those within nursing and other parts of the healthcare profession not only supported it, they were ones that initiated and implement this type of experiment and murders. Nazi ideology was extreme. That's not true also, because it was an outgrowth of eugenic theories that were initiated by the US and the UK, but was taken one step further. Nazi physicians did not have a set of ethics, or ethics were ignored. They did have a set of ethics. I point you to a book that was written by Rudolf Ramm, who ironically is a family physician and not a very good one at that, but he wrote a book called Medical Jurisprudence and the Rules of Medical Profession. Within that book, it also talks about certain approaches to health, certain approaches to diet, certain approaches to smoking, but it also emphasized that the role of the physician is to the Third Reich and not to the patient. Number 6, Nazi experiments were pseudo-experiments by crazed physicians. That's not true either. This was medical professionals who were well respected before the war. And even some of the experiments that are used, experiments that were performed, are attempted to be used today. Some of the hypothermia experiments that were used for cardiovascular surgery. The Pernkov Atlas is still used because it was still considered one of the premier anatomical atlases in the world. And the seventh is the Holocaust has no relevance today. I think it does, because if one does not understand history, one is very doomed to repeat it. When I was in medical school, my first day, I had a wise and old professor. His name was Max Gutensohn, and this is back in 1977. And he wrote the following on the blackboard. Rule number 1, the patient comes first. Rule number 2, if you get rule number 1, then you need to go back and read it. Rule number 3, there are no other rules. He turned to my class and said, now that you know the rules, you are physicians. Everything else is experience and book knowledge. And I think the major lesson that you should learn from this, whether you're a physician, whether you're a geneticist, whether you're a nurse, or whether you're involved with any way, shape, or form with patients, is that we are involved in a human pursuit. We need to put the patient first. We need to avoid the abuse of power and the abuse of patience. And we need to, as Max Gutensohn said after this, you need to leave your politics at the door. The only thing that it matters is that patient that's sitting in front of you who is dependent upon you for her or his health.
As we close, we invite you to pause and reflect on what you've heard today. We've explored how Jewish identity is shaped not only by culture and tradition, but also by the painful reality of anti-Semitism. We've seen how bias and discrimination can erode trust in healthcare, isolate colleagues, and harm clients who rely on us for care and understanding. We've also considered the broader societal danger, how dehumanizing rhetoric, if left unchallenged, echoes the conditions that allowed atrocities like the Holocaust to occur. As genetic counselors, our code of ethics reminds us that every individual is worthy of dignity, respect, and compassion. We have a responsibility to recognize patterns of anti-Semitism and to act, to listen with humility, to advocate for inclusion, and to challenge prejudice wherever we see it. In doing so, we not only serve our clients and colleagues with integrity, but we also affirm our role in safeguarding the humanity we all share. Thank you for joining us and for your commitment to carry this work forward.